the quickest way you could possibly hydrate their system, whether you put Himalayan salt, Celtic salt on your tongue for a few seconds, which will help absorb through the base membrane, and then you consume water that allows the body to pick up some of these minerals, help balance out this sodium-potassium pump.
So just literally taking one of the rocks
Mm-hmm.
and on the tongue for 3 seconds.
Yep.
And that actually just will allow the absorption just
Yep.
by the mucous membrane. And I had never heard of that before. What's
Yeah.
really interesting was if you lose 1 to 4% of your retained water body weight, you will experience up to 30% reduction of capacity durability to generate effort. That is incredible.
Welcome to the Functional Code, your go-to source for decoding optimal health. Join Dr. Addy and Dr. Jace as they break down the science behind pain, performance, longevity, and more, making complex concepts easy for you to understand and apply in your life. Your journey to a healthier you begins with understanding the Functional Code.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Functional Code. We are going to be talking everything from water to proper ways to stay hydrated. We're going to be talking all about different water types. Stay tuned. There's a lot of great research that we're going to dive into. I know that you guys are going to be excited about this one. As always, I am Dr. Addy.
And I am Dr. Jace. Yeah, we are super excited to go into everything hydration, types of water, all this stuff, especially even understanding where the myths out there. I know Doc and I, we went into a lot of the areas of research and tried to find both sides. Do certain waters benefit? Do they not? So we have a decent amount of research coming your way on that one. So Doc, let's dive in and let's get to the nitty-gritty. Some of the basics, like where the daily needs, and then we'll get into more specifics as we go through. But I guess what have you found in terms of needs for water consumption?
Right. So starting out, I wanted to dive in just to the basics of hydration and understanding that before we jump into some other theories. I know you're going to be talking about the Gallup theory coming up. I'm excited to learn more about that. But there are some just institutes and bodies of governing agencies out there that make obviously their recommendations on how humans should hydrate, stay hydrated, and then just some other research that they've found obviously that water intake can improve, which it's interesting because as I was diving into the research, it was almost just too logical for me. It's of course water is going to be helpful. It almost seems just a little bit a waste of my time doing this. But what was interesting was I found it more difficult to find some of this research. I actually thought there'd be just so much research on in consuming water, and I had a tougher time finding the specifics. As logical as that sounds, as hydration is going to improve all parts of your life, it was tougher for me to find the specific good studies, I should say, on hydration. According to the Institute of Medicine, men should aim for about 3.7 liters of total daily water intake. Women should aim for around 2.7. I don't know why there would be a difference. Probably just the size of men compared to women is usually larger, is my guess. This just shows obviously how crucial hydration is. But the one thing that I found was interesting was the reoccurrence of improving cognitive function. There were studies that explained those who were drinking more water compared to placebo had better attention and clarity, even in patients that had ADHD.
Wow.
So that was interesting. And then just performance, obviously physical performance. If athletes are dehydrated, you're going to have way less performance versus those who are dehydrated. It had shown improvements for kidney function, urinary health, cardiovascular. All of those were easier to make sense. The other two that I thought were interesting was lower the risks of kidney stones if you are consuming appropriate water intake. Chronic kidney disease is lower. Again, attention, memory, and visual learning, particular in vulnerable populations like children and the elderly, can improve if you are well hydrated. And then again, just effects on cardiovascular health, metabolic function. So yeah, when I dove in, it was very interesting. I know that there's a lot more recommendations out there on how much to consume. We've even heard of the 8-8 rule, where it's 8 glasses of 8-ounce water. I mean, there's so many out there. So that's why I'm excited to get into the Gallup theory, because I think, like you had said, it explains it really well. But Doc, what were some of the things that you dove into when it came to just hydration itself and certain resources.
Yeah, like you said, when we look at just consuming 8 ounces of water every hour, especially for the first 10 hours, there's certain lines of literature, which I'll get to here in a sec, for the circadian cycle and how that affects and is affected by water consumption, especially when it supplies and when the circadian cycle and rhythm communicate to all the other cells throughout the body. You obviously want to make sure that the regulation of water absorption and excretion is definitely proper, which then helps regulate all the other systems in the body. So it's definitely important. Now, in terms of hydrated or dehydrated, we're not going to dive into this too much, but there's a couple different ways that you can look about this. If you feel like your mouth is dry, that could be a sign of dehydration, or simple tests of usually what they've taught in schools. If you pinch your thumb or any type of nail a few seconds with a firm pressure, release, and if that white color after pressing doesn't return back to a pinkish red color within 3 seconds, that could be another sign of dehydration. There's also a skin pinch test. If it doesn't come back, it could be also signs of dehydration. So some of these small things will give you a decent idea, but even headaches can also have a sign of dehydration, but that could also be due to lack of minerals, electrolytes, and whatnot within the water too. So when we looked at this, I wanted to look at, obviously, water absorption, consumption is super important, but to make sure that the body's functioning, not that you're just consuming a bunch, but when we go through this podcast with especially the different types of waters, it'll give us a better understanding of how we're able to absorb and utilize the water for all these benefits on which we're going to talk about here in a second. Obviously, there's so many limitations that you have if you don't consume water. The research is saying you can't live without water within 3 to up to 7 days. There was actually a book called The Long Walk, which was pretty much a Polish officer and 6 others escaping from a Siberian camp. This is back in like 1941, so way, way back, but more so than anything else, they're able to survive without water for up to 10 days, which is incredible.
Yeah, it is.
They had to go through and try to consume different types of waters from sketchy sources, but obviously they had to do what they had to do to get out, and they had to trek over 4,000 miles, and this is in India too. It's in a desert. The resources are absolutely limited, so just the fact that they're able to not go up to 10 days without water is incredible. So it gives us a good understanding of what the body can go through. So when we look into how to get water into the cell and have the cell be able to utilize it. Now, I don't want to go too deep with this, but when we look at the cell, there is sodium on the outside, potassium on the inside, mainly for the sodium-potassium pump. Now, if you consume too much table salt, if you consume too much processed foods, the diffusion rate, if we will, to allow more pressure and swelling outside the cell, which won't allow it to exchange because you still need a decent amount of potassium. Now, potassium usually comes with greens. It usually comes with a bunch of like healthy fruits and vegetables that you can find within your diet. So if you don't consume that, then it's just going to lead to swelling in the extremities and also lack of use of the water that is consumed as well. So pay attention to what you're eating, but I would almost look at the quickest way you could possibly hydrate the system, whether you put Himalayan salt, Celtic salt on your tongue for a few seconds, which will help absorb through the base membrane, and then you consume water that allows the body to pick up some of these minerals, help balance out this sodium potassium pump. And then obviously there's other things needed in terms of sun, vitamin D, calcium. Glucose is a whole nother thing as well, especially for diabetics. So all these areas of regulation are so needed. But
so just literally taking one of the rocks and on the tongue for 3 seconds. And that actually just will allow the absorption just by the mucous membrane. And I had never heard of that before. Which I thought was cool, because most of the time when I'm throwing either Celtic salt or some other things in my water, it doesn't always diffuse together. And so just the fact that I can just do that and it absorbs that quickly.
Yes.
That's cool. I want to try it before like a workout and see if I notice anything different.
And it's actually fascinating. I tried that last night, and actually after I was eating some food at the time, and it actually enhanced the taste of the food too.
Really?
It's incredible.
What did you do, magnesium, or which one did you do?
I did Himalayan.
Okay.
Yeah. But when they looked at it, this like Celtic salt has upwards of 82 minerals, where Himalayan salt has about 75 or so. Now, the thing that you want to stay away from is table salt, because it's pretty much a sodium chloride, only 2 chemicals, which if that even gets into the bloodstream, that can be toxic and poisonous. So just the fact that if people are putting on processed foods, it's going to alter the taste buds. It's going to alter just the absorption rate of pretty much the whole body, going back to the potassium sodium pump. It's just a whole thing in itself.
And there is plenty of sodium in a lot of foods already, and that's what a lot of people don't know, is you're already adding that on top of the highly sodium infused foods too. So you got to understand that before, and that's another thing we're going to dive into as well, with just the different types of water and knowing what to consume versus what not to. But I would say when it comes to those who are consuming higher amounts of processed foods, they're the ones who should be focused on the sodium portion of that. Because then you have the opposite side, which maybe people aren't consuming enough salt, and they have sore joints, and they could use more sodium too. But I would say for most individuals who are unfortunately overweight, consume a lot of processed foods, that's something that they should be thinking about too.
Yes.
I don't know, Doc,
No, you're 100%. And even going back to the joints and even arthritis itself, the synovial fluid within most joints throughout the body, whether it's the shoulders, the spine, the knees, hips, joints, they're made up of 90% of water in the synovial fluid. So if you deplete the body from just even absorbing the water itself, then you're going to lead to more achy joints, stiffer, painful movements that will tend to lead from there. Just even on top of like lungs are needed for hydration, or hydration is needed within the lungs, because if the capillaries and blood vessels aren't getting enough exchange rate of oxygen, CO2 through there, it's also going to constrict the alveoli, which are these small, like, I look at like grapes within the lungs, and that's where you're able to bring oxygen, and CO2 is then expelled through the breath, and then that's where it can lead to a bunch of other things in terms of like cardiovascular
and
health
water
problems.
can increase that perfusion rate, so to say.
100%.
Yeah.
Let alone every other thing in terms of guts and the diffusion of the small intestine, large intestine, the stomach, the communication of the pancreas, enzymes coming out, thus the help for absorption as well. But it is affecting every other part of the body.
So you touched on circadian rhythms, Doc. I'm curious, what's with the intake of water and understanding how we as humans have to worry about our circadian rhythm? We've talked on circadian rhythm so many different podcasts too, so I like that we're adding this in here today. What did you find in regards to the circadian rhythm and consuming water?
Yeah, so when you look at circadian rhythm or circadian cycles, it's a time clock which regulates about every 24 hours, give or take a few minutes with that. And more or less, the circadian clock can be regulated by a few different areas, whether it's sunlight coming in the eyes, whether it's the time that you consume food. And now we know that it's also water consumption as well, and when you consume that. Going back to the communication of absorption rate via like the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is part of the circadian cycle, and that helps regulate all the other cells throughout the body. So they did a couple of studies, some of which it helps regulate the thirst regulation, especially before sleep, to where people have a tendency to feel like they need to consume water, let's say like 4 hours before sleep, give or take. And that's mainly regulated by a hormone known as antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. It also has effects such as like vasopressin, which just regulates the water absorption within the kidneys. And that will then help prevent dehydration throughout the body. So when people are drinking a bunch of water, then they feel like they have to get up and go to the bathroom. They probably don't have the minerals within their system, which will then allow for absorption. Because if you are able to consume like this water that we're talking about with proper minerals within 4 hours of bed, you're not going to need to go to the bathroom for during the night, or at least it'll reduce the amount of time.
Because our ability to retain that water is improved, and then we won't actually need to excrete as much.
So there's a couple of rules to play with, and that was via some research done in 2010 by Bennett Hellman. It's a study out of Nature on why the body isn't thirsty at night. So I thought that was interesting and definitely applicable for this podcast. But
so when they're consuming water at night, they should obviously look to improve that process with minerals.
Yes.
You're going to have a way better improved ability to retain the hydration that you consumed, and then probably even eliminate the need to go at night.
Yes.
Once you're sleeping.
Yes. And then the last thing I want to add in is the amount of water you consume at a time. If you take, say, drinking a half a cup of water like every hour or so throughout the day, that'll allow better absorption, especially a few hours before bed. Definitely not chugging a bunch of water, but slowly intaking throughout the day, and then maybe a little bit 4 hours before bed will help significantly through this process.
And I don't know if you found anything, Doc, too. Was there anything on consuming water in the mornings, or when to?
Yeah.
Was there anything that you had found there, or
there wasn't as much for the mornings, but most of us, to get the system on the same page, especially with the circadian system, you want to regulate the light coming in the eyes, the food, and then the water. So when you look at that, ideally you want to drink a glass of water or a half a glass of water right when waking.
Yep.
Brush your teeth, go to the bathroom, take all the essentials under control, and then maybe drink another half a glass. Probably get outside, get the sunlight in the eyes safely, of course, and then have the same timing of meals, whether it's breakfast, lunch, dinner, or if you don't consume breakfast, maybe gain proper nutrients, especially Celtic, Himalayan salt in the morning with your water, possibly even lemon in there. So there's definitely some variability to that, but that's definitely where I'd look at from there.
Perfect.
So,
yeah, I know I've heard a lot of individuals who start their day with a glass of water or a certain amount of water. It's different depending on who I've talked to, but they say that it's been a great just routine starter. They feel even just better when they can put water down, maybe even before coffee or doing other things. Yeah, I know that a lot of people enjoy starting their day off with just a glass of water.
Love it.
So that brings us to, we've talked about when to consume water. We've talked about understanding why we would need to hydrate in the first place. But we touched briefly on how much we should actually drink. But I think this theory that we're about to get into really does explain it in a way that maybe gives people a bit of a better understanding of how much to consume and why. Doc, do you want to touch a little bit on the Gallup theory? And then, of course, who is Andy Gallup and why do we like him so much, right?
Yes. So I'll start with Andy Gallup. So we found some of this research via him and some of the clients that he's worked with. He's a researcher, was from Caltech, now with Parker University, which we absolutely love on that. So when he utilizes this with athletes, especially when exercising, the body has to absorb and utilize this water that is consumed, but sweating plays a factor. Gastric discharge is another factor. So there's a bunch of systems throughout the body that need this water to utilize for the performance of whatever activity you want to do. When you look at exercising, especially high intense exercises, you can lose anywhere up from 1 to 5 pounds of water. So when you look at that, you have to think, okay, how can I replenish the water, and what does that look like?
Okay.
So once you know that your body is losing anywhere upwards of 1 to 4% of body weight, you're definitely going to experience either a lack of cognition, a memory, recall, strength, endurance. Like all these performance indicators will definitely diminish via not having this water. How do you get this water in? Now, the better way you can look at this is, what is your body weight in pounds?
Okay.
Divide by 30. Gives you the amount of water you need to consume every 15 minutes of exercise.
Okay.
So body weight divided by 30, that's the amount of ounces needed every 15 minutes of exercise. Now that's maybe not everything on the dot, but give you a good idea in terms of if you're going to play a soccer match that lasts an hour long, you need to have a decent idea, maybe have a water bar filled of, you have to have this drink by either the end of the game or at the end of the game to give you a good idea of more or less the water that's coming in. Now, let's say it might be on a higher end, maybe a little bit more than this if you're, let's say, playing soccer in a desert or in a very hot, humid climate, or instead of you're in a either not as warm environments. So you take into consideration the thermic effect as well.
So let's say for a 120-pound individual, that's going to be 4 ounces every 15 minutes of exercise. So for an hour long, that's about 12 ounces needing in that hour while they're exercising and finished by the time they exercise.
And when you take that into consideration, that's just like
that's not that much.
A can of
No.
soda, if you want a comparison, if you will.
What's really interesting was if you lose 1 to 4% of your retained water body weight, you will experience up to 30% reduction of capacity to your ability to generate effort. That is incredible.
Yeah.
The fact that's not a lot of water lost.
Definitely not.
And then to have that much an effect on your performance. So athletes, they need to understand that immensely, especially if you are an athlete that doesn't like to drink a lot of water. That's already, you're really going to be pushing harder than others to generate that kind of performance.
And I would even put this in the same page, not even just exercise, but also sauna use. Like anytime that you're sweating excessively or even just nervous, you still want to replenish the body. So you need electrolytes, usually come in form of the minerals that we talked about, Celtic sea salt or Himalayan sea salt. So that absorption, by all means, huge game changer.
That's interesting. Well, that's great. If individuals are not getting enough water, which is usually most of the time, that's something that they can obviously utilize. But you had even looked into if individuals are drinking too much water. Now, is there something that they should be worried about when consuming too much water? And does that ever get to that point? Can you harm yourself drinking too much water?
Yeah, I think there's, whether it's water, whether it's eating too much food, having too much of certain things can lead to the body breaking down. So if you consume too much water excessively, it's then going to pull electrolytes throughout your body, and then it's going to take that apart from your brain and the needs that it has, and then your brain starts shutting off, and then you can pass out and die from just even drinking too much water itself. Now that will vary from person to person, but I think there's a good understanding. If you drink, I know what we said up top, it was 2.7 liters for females, 3.7 for males. If you're consuming over 5 liters a day and you start noticing these weird side effects, that could be a sign that you're over watering itself.
Sure. And I think that's a rarity for most, but for those who are super efficient at consuming water, maybe something that you could think about. I've only heard of a couple stories of individuals consuming that much amount of water and then having severe or even fatal effects. But just so you guys understand it is absolutely harmful if you do consume way too much water.
And this can come along lines of people maybe with special needs. That's within my family, so I have a tendency to pay attention to that a little bit more. If you're taking care of individuals that maybe can't take care of themselves, to obviously watch water consumption as well. If they're drinking too much and they're having these other symptoms, maybe try to regulate and just have them try to drink this amount of water throughout the day, and just have that be their basis, whether it's using that within food to make food. There's evaporation effects, so you have to take that into consideration if you're using that. But just for them consuming that amount of water, if they have to keep filling that maybe a huge jug up, then it's something you might want to regulate.
And the only other thing I have on that is if you find yourself ever consuming way more water than you were ever used to at one point and urinating way more frequently than you've ever done in one point, and we're talking upwards of 20 times a day, go get your blood sugar checked, because that's usually a sign of diabetes. And again, just food for thought for those that all of a sudden had this increase in thirst and output of urination. just letting you know about that one too.
Very,
So,
very good point. I'm glad
yep,
you brought that up. Now, let's go dive into the types of water,
for sure.
because I know this is where you've done a deep dive on a lot of this stuff. And I found a few studies myself, but between the different types of hydrogen water, alkaline water, reverse osmosis, deuterium-depleted water, sparkling water, there's distilled water, there's a lot of different
There
types of
is.
waters.
And I didn't realize just how many individuals were so specific about their water
Hmm.
and had almost this like following where it's like, no, I only drink this kind of water because I feel a certain way.
Hmm.
And I was always curious if that even meant anything. Was there a reason why they chose this water? Did they feel a certain way? Was there good research around it? And I want to throw this out too, because I know a gentleman, his name's Gary Brecka, who talks, this is the first water we're going to jump into, which is hydrogen water. And I've heard him say this quote many times, which is there are thousands of articles on hydrogen water. And I typed into PubMed, hydrogen water studies. I found three that I could maybe use to explain its benefits. So I've heard Ben Greenfield talk about hydrogen water. I've heard Brecka. I've heard a few others. I've tried it myself. I've done
I
the
like
hydrogen
it.
tablet. And
Hmm.
I definitely want to make sure that people are talking about it out there. But the question is it even worth your time? Because
Hmm.
when you think about it, water's pretty dang cheap, especially if you are able to access it in most cases in the United States. Outside in the United States, it's a little different in other countries. But for us, it's very cheap to use. Water filters are cheap. We're going to get into the types of water here in a second. But really, the point of this for today, I wanted to make sure you guys weren't spending outrageous amounts of money on water because,
Hmm.
again, there are plenty of people out there who are looking to take your money for absolutely no reason. So jumping in today, hydrogen water. There's a great systematic review titled Hydrogen Water Extra Healthy or Hoax. And I loved the title of the study because I think the ones that did the study were on the same page as me as really, is there any benefits? And if not, is this just a health fad? So they did show small case studies improving antioxidant properties, inflammation, possibly some metabolic benefits, and of course, athletic performance. Now, increasing any amount of water is going to improve athletic performance. Increasing any amount of water is going to improve metabolism, inflammation, and improving antioxidants fed. Your ability to study between the two is going to be difficult. It really is, because when the control is water and then you're comparing it to another type of water, it's really difficult. Of the samples that they showed, a lot of them didn't even have placebo. It was just those who drank the hydrogen water had good benefits. You got to have something to compare it to. There was a lot of biases. There was really no high quality or even large sample sizes. It was very small. So already what I've found from the review was that it was classified merely as a health miracle or a fad. There really not too much research to show its benefits yet. Not to say that you can go, if you want to go and try it for yourself, that's fine, but don't allocate monthly funds towards hydrogen water because it really is not going to improve your life compared to maybe just the tap water or filtered water. That's what I found. Doc, was there anything that you had found on hydrogen water?
Going back to your point, at least as far as we know thus far, until more
Right.
research comes out and better control and methods on how they're able to compare. And just even like when I was looking at this too, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, so if people aren't consuming enough water, which majority aren't
Mhm.
when you look through it every single day basis, because there's not as much availability just to store water within your body. Whatever you're consuming, you want to be able to utilize on a more of a acute basis within a day-to-day or hour-by-hour stance. Factoring that in to hydrogen water, I know I've tried a couple of them. It actually tastes a little more smoother, which will probably have the potential, whether it's a placebo effect or you feel like it's better. I think that's where it can come from. And I've known myself, without diving into the research, I've got fact-checked on social media, which I'm perfectly okay and fine with. But knowing that after diving into this area, I know you and a little bit myself, I think there's definitely more concern for research to know moving forward. So
And there might be individuals out there who had started drinking this kind of water and saw some great change. It's great, perfect. Curious what your life would have been like if you were just consuming more regular water.
yeah.
What was that going to be like for you? But if you found that the hydrogen water was tastier or you liked it more, well then power to you and you were able to consume more, that's awesome.
Exactly.
And so again, I'm not going to spend too much extra money on it, but if you find that it's a great way to improve your health, then perfect. So Doc, I know you dove into more alkaline water, and I'm curious to know your take because I think we have some differing opinions on it. So Harvard Health put out an article and it was called, "Is Alkaline Water Better?" And they had some good points. I know that they dove into some of the claims that it had improved, which I know that I have seen some studies showing that there is some improvements. But this was the same basis of the hydrogen water, which was we have claims, but we don't have enough body of evidence to actually state if it's helpful or not. So alkaline water is, again, defined as having a higher pH than regular drinking water, which is around 7 for regular drinking water. Alkaline would be anywhere, I believe, in the 8 to even 9 sometimes. I know is labeled on certain drinking waters you can buy in the store. Claims it actually has more of a hydrating effect than regular water. Evidence is limited. It can help regulate the acid-base balance in the body. Again, going to need more research to show that. And then just health benefits. Some claim that it can prevent disease such as cancer or osteoporosis, but we still lack way more research to even claim that. But safety, drinking alkaline water is going to be one of the safest forms of treatment of anything. There's really no risk of drinking alkaline water. So it's not that you shouldn't or be deterred from doing it. I know there's plenty of alkaline water brands you can go into any store and buy, so don't be worried about choosing it for yourself. But if you are going to use it to treat something that you have or manage a health condition, then I would look further into the research. But just going and drinking it, I have no problem. I think I've bought it before just because it was something quick I grabbed. I am not deterring anyone from drinking it, but just as long as you aren't using it to manage any health condition. But Doc, what did you find on its health effects? And I'm just curious what you had in store there.
Yeah, so I looked at it from a couple different standpoints. And I know when you look at the pH of the system, you definitely want to have homeostasis and have the body not be too acidic, or else there's a bunch of like gut problems that can usually come from there. Thus the antacids, Tums, if we will, then usually can get consumed. So you want definitely a balance between these two. And then at the end of this podcast, we're going to get into like proper ways to store this water, especially alkaline water, which they're saying that the better effects to even just to store it are within a couple weeks. So when you look at that and how it's processed and then put onto the shelves, and I don't know all the specifics with each and every company, but then can lead to delayed effects from there. So that's where, unless you're making your own like alkaline water or making your own reverse osmosis water at your home, that will have different effects for different people, if we will. But when looking at alkaline water specifically, they looked at the antioxidant activity, the metabolic benefits, and a lot of that was just the consumed rates at one, how it's coming in the body, and two, how it's being utilized, especially within the stomach, pancreas, gut, which then allows for better absorption rates. At least that's what they're stating.
Oh, sure.
But I guess when you look at this, it may have benefits for enhancing some of this. I think there's definitely more larger studies needed and definitely better control groups, but that's some of the things that they saw. Now, when they looked at the effects, this is a study in 2022, the effects of alkaline reduced water on gastrointestinal disease or GI conditions. They noticed that it helps with reactive oxygen species, or ROS, which thus helps with the metabolic function. There's a bunch of other stuff in terms of improvement of these GI symptoms, just not only through that, but also it has shown, and this is in addition to this study, going back to a 2008 study from Shine et al., which helped improve abdominal pain and increase the quality of IBS, so irritable bowel syndrome symptoms. So it can be utilized for some of that. For some people, again, I think there's definitely more research. It helps with inflammatory response. So when you look at the stomach, if there's a lot of water, especially just like tap water, and it doesn't have the minerals needed for absorption. It then will increase the histamine levels, which then can have more of a fight or flight reaction to how the body utilizes the inflammatory state in certain conditions, if we will. Once you get into alkaline water, once you get into water with minerals, they'll help for decreasing the histamine levels that is released in the stomach, which thus would also make sense for the inflammatory response. So I can see some effects there, but I think that there's so many other factors involved with individuals, whether it's certain brain conditions, whether it's diabetes, whether it's other symptoms involved. I think it will help for the majority because the body it needs water. And if you put an emphasis on consuming water, there's only going to be positive effect. But now with these studies, they looked at it from a bunch of different things, from a microbiome analysis, biochemical assays. They looked at it from even questionnaires. So I think they did their due diligence on how they're able to assess it. But I think going back to, I think there's definitely going to be more studies and needed for more subjects and from different symptoms and syndromes and conditions factored into this as well.
So there's definitely a larger body of evidence for those already having gut issues or some type of microbiome change. That's interesting. Just the fact that we at least had some specificity on those cases versus just drink this in general, it'll help you. Because those are really tough to explain. But at least with those, we had a certain subset of patients that saw a certain change, which helps because then it's like, okay, it doesn't help everyone, but it does help this certain type of person. So then we at least have a starting point on who should be consuming this water. But the toughest thing I think for any scientist that's going to study water is what is the true difference between just drinking regular water versus this specific water. And I think if they could figure out a way to study it without any type of just knowing that we're going to probably see change on your control, that's such a tough thing to compare it to because more than likely the control itself is going to already have good results. So what is a good control that you maybe can, I don't know, you can't sham study water. There's no fake water you can give someone. So that would be the only thing that I think would make a little bit more difference if they could figure out a way to put that into research.
Yeah, especially with so many subjects, and it has to come from probably a similar source as the control.
Right.
Like a certain tap water in certain states have different chemical imbalances, like different stuff within the whole system. So that just knowing that and doing a large study it's incredibly difficult itself. And then you add in like a randomized control trial of this other alkaline water, hydrogen water, with the same baseline of either tap water. I think it's going to be difficult, and I think there has to be almost a long-term study with that one. So if anyone's listening, researcher-wise, this is something that can help for most people, and we would definitely implore and ask to potentially go down that pathway. That is something that you find interesting. So, Doc, deuterium-depleted water.
Yeah, I'd seen Ben Greenfield talk about this. I think I've seen Dr. McCullough talk about this. There's some other more cutting-edge biohackers who like to talk about these kinds of things. And when I had first studied it, this was way more than 5 or 10 years ago, and I don't think it's gained that much traction. But I knew a little bit about it just from people that I followed, and deuterium-depleted water, I believe, is similar to, I don't know if it's similar to hydrogen water, but it contains a large amount of deuterium, which is a stable isotope of hydrogen.
Gotcha.
So it's, like I said, it's similar to hydrogen water. I know you can make it yourself through this very easy process, I think, of freezing and thawing water.
Interesting.
I looked into it briefly. This was, again, years ago. But the reason why it gained so much notoriety was it was found to have potentially therapeutic effects on cancer treatment. And there were some small correlative change when it came to DDW, deuterium-depleted water, and cancer. What they found was, in some clinical trials, positive outcomes such as reduced tumor size and improved quality of life in patients consuming DDW, which alone was interesting. A lot of animal studies, though, was where they have gained a lot of traction with DDW and showed a lot of inhibiting tumor growth and enhancing the effectiveness of other therapies on animal studies that had cancer. So really what they're proposing was that it has effects on alterations in cellular metabolism and apoptosis, which again is just the cell death of cells that are bad. Your body's ability to eliminate those. What they concluded was, of course, it's incredibly safe. It's just water. It might be a potential adjunct therapy to other cancer treatments. But again, there's a lot more that needs to be done. But this one, again, I liked the specificity for just a subset of patients versus everyone should drink this. It's going to help you in all this time. It's tough for me to take that seriously. But the fact that these individuals have studied a very specific subset of patients with this type of water gives this a little bit more credibility, but I wouldn't base your cancer treatment on this water by any means. But yeah, look into it. It was very interesting when I did read up on it.
Fascinating. I've never even heard of it before. Last week when we started going through some of this stuff and looked at it a little bit myself, and I saw the cancer properties, but there wasn't much out there.
It really isn't. I think 2 or 3 studies, very small. Again, I wouldn't base my entire cancer treatment off of this water, but
yeah, I think it's hard to even find this stuff in stores. I think you have to almost make it yourself.
I think you do.
So that's probably what part of
I
it.
remember Ben going outside, back inside of freezing and thawing.
Oh, wow.
It had something to do with that. I'm sure you can YouTube how to create your own deuterium-depleted water. It's probably very simple. More power to you.
So, Doc, sparkling water, because I know you like a little bit of carbonation
do.
in your water.
Yeah.
I myself, not as much, but at the same point, is it sparkling water? What are the benefits or lack thereof?
Yeah, I have actually tried to spend so much time studying sparkling water because I drink a lot of sparkling water. I like sparkling water, and I've questioned people who understand the energy and Ayurvedic, acupuncture, Chinese medicine portion of hydrotherapy. Naturopaths, those kinds of providers, they really enjoy studying hydrotherapy, and so they have a great body of evidence on understanding drinking water, temperatures, those types of things. I've questioned those providers a lot. I've also looked at research showing any change in the body regarding sparkling water, and you're going to have 2 differing points of view just because one is more anecdotal, one is more empirical. So from the empirical side, this was from University of Chicago Medicine. Is carbonated water good for you? They pointed out first and foremost that there is no difference between consuming carbonated water versus still water in regards of hydration. It's going to be the same. Now, if you enjoy carbonated water, they said it's a great way to stay hydrated because you can at least then consume more water, and it's going to help you on that point. Is it going to give you any positive benefit compared to the latter? No. One thing that they did raise concern about, which some argue that it has no effect, others argue that it does, is if you have caps on your teeth. There is some studies showing that high amounts of carbonation can actually remove the adhesive or just create a less of a seal on those, which is interesting because I have caps, and that was my concern. Was if am I consuming too much of this? Is it going to be a negative effect on my cap? So I have no idea if it actually does cause any change in erosion of the adhesion, but some say yes, some say no.
Maybe dentists out there, if you've noticed it, by all means, comment in.
Yeah, drop some info because I want to know more. I'm really interested in understanding more about sparkling water from the Chinese medicine, that kind of side, and a little bit of studies over here. It has shown to maybe aid digestion. I know a lot of people who maybe have an upset stomach or sour stomach. Any type of carbonation can improve that. I'm sure plenty of you have heard that out there. 7-Up or just something that was carbonated. That alone probably has more of the studies regarding carbonation or carbonated water. From an acupuncture, Ayurvedic, Chinese medicine standpoint, I was given information saying that carbonated water has a cooling effect or has a cool energy. And for those who have either hot organs, or they call them like a hot energy, warm energy in regards to certain organ points. And I'm probably getting this wrong, but you can have different explanations of your organs in Chinese medicine. It can be damp, it can be dry, it can be cold, it can be warm, all of these things. And I tend to run warmer in a lot of, like, I guess, my energy, and I'm usually type A. I definitely expend a lot more energy. I'm a thinner. So I love carbonated water, they believe, because it has such a cooling effect on my organ points. And so it balances me in a way, which makes sense. Makes sense to me. Whether or not that affects you in any way, just to get some food for thought. The last thing that it had said was it could negatively impact bone health, but there is really no significant evidence to support this claim. So overall, it's a great way to get more water if you enjoy carbonated water versus still water. But as far as any positive or negative effects, there really isn't a lot of research to prove that.
Which would make sense there too. I thought that was interesting, because I've heard some of this stuff warmer, cooler, especially from like a Eastern medicine side of things, which bring that into the equation. That's interesting. Now, Doc, distilled water. Now, this is where I personally myself have heard some more on the negative aspect, but I think it's something that a lot of people should be aware of. So what have you found with that?
This is funny because this is where I found a lot of like followers.
Yep.
There are some people who only drink distilled water because they believe it is just the right water to drink. And I was almost told that distilled water is not something you should drink. So there was this like clash of beliefs when it came to distilled water. So distilled water is created through a process of distillation. The water is boiled, the steam is collected and cooled back to liquid. Now, it improves the water because it removes impurities, but it also removes minerals and other things. So I guess the concern there is if you're drinking too much distilled water, you're not getting any minerals. It's removing pretty much everything from the water. And we're going to get to that in a little bit of why. Well, we've already covered it as far as the mineral point, but
it takes electrolytes from your body, excretes them out, and then
and so if you're going to be drinking only distilled water, which I've found that there is no study showing that drinking distilled water it has any negative effects other than you aren't getting the appropriate minerals. So if you are, find a mineral drop or electrolyte pack or something, like you said, Celtic salt, Himalayan salt. Those are going to be something that you absolutely should add in if you're going to be drinking more distilled water. But it definitely is very pure, has a lot of benefits there. Again, no minerals, so you got to worry about that. And then as far as hydration or health implications, really no change or any real studies showing benefits if you're drinking hydrogen water versus other water. For those out there that are swearing by it, keep doing your thing. I don't see anything regarding the positive effects, but teach their own. It's relatively a great way to drink versus tap water. I think there's a lot of states that have some pretty harsh, hard water and maybe have things in there more than just the regular minerals that you need to. So from that standpoint, I think drinking that kind of water would be a benefit. I myself don't drink tap water. I think you can go on your water company's website and find all of the reports that they do on your state's water. And most of the time it's heavily chlorinated. It might even have small traces of certain bacteria and pathogens in there. It's probably at a very low parts per million, but it's still in there. Is it worrisome? I don't know. I just choose to drink, filtered water. But that's just my 2 cents on that. Doc?
No, that's a really good point. And you have to look at, I love the point you brought up, where you're located, what state. Because there's even, I can't remember where it was. I think this was in Michigan. I could be completely wrong, where the water that they were able to drink from tap water had chemical contaminants.
Yeah, in Flint. You're right.
Flint,
You're right. You're right. Yep.
So they were only able to consume water via the grocery stores, bottled water.
I think Michigan told them not to drink the water.
Exactly.
Which that's freaky.
And so just even knowing that, the fact that's even a thing, there could be other things that you may not be aware of in your state. I know here in Arizona, like we almost need water softeners in order to drink the water just because of the chemical and the erosion within a desert standpoint, and the pipes that water is held in can erode really quickly and easily. So to filter that out is incredibly important. Maybe that's different for states up north. I guess when I was living in North Dakota, Minnesota, I never noticed that any of that myself.
Yeah.
But just pay attention to where you're living, going back to your waters, your city's water websites, see where they're at. They probably have way more information
For sure.
that we have on that aspect and the health of your tap water. But going back to distilled water, I would highly suggest if you just drink that straight, you need electrolytes, you
Yep.
need minerals. That's where I'm going to leave it at that
Yeah,
one.
agreed.
Yeah.
Totally.
Now, reverse osmosis, and I've looked into actually getting a unit in my house. They're upwards of couple $1,000.
They're good ones, yep.
And I see decent positive effects with that, but it's a whole system in itself. And unless you can afford it, it's tough for most people to consume and get reverse osmosis water. What have you found with that, Doc?
So this is probably the gold standard, or at least what most people look for when drinking some type of filtered water. And I myself, if I ever own my own home, I'm going to look to put an RO filter in my home because just of the positives that I think it can bring bring people who are consuming water. Now, when it comes to, I guess, some of the health implications or benefits, it's very similar to what we had gone over. But as far as contaminant removal, it's one of the more highly effective ways of removing contaminants, including heavy metals. And that's the most important part, like lead and arsenic, but also chlorine, fluoride, pesticides. There is a great study showing that RO systems definitely reduce the amount of harmful substances versus other types of systems. So the water quality is going to be way more beneficial, in my opinion, especially if you're looking to remove all of those things out there. Now, some are going to argue that fluoride, is not a really worrisome chemical to be concerned about. But again, I would disagree. I've even argued with my dentists about this. We're going to just always meet in the middle on that one. I've always chosen to never do the fluoride treatments when I go to the dentist. I try to avoid that as much as possible. You can look up online do your own research on
There's
that.
a reason for that, but
Yeah.
we're going to leave that at bay for
Yeah.
today. Yeah.
What I've found, though, is if you are going to consume RO water, obviously the same thing. You got to have electrolyte drops, mineral drops, or just like we said, Himalayan salt and Celtic salt when you are consuming this type of water, because it does remove everything. It's slightly more acidic than regular tap water, which I thought was interesting. Safe for hydration. There's really no change in hydration compared to other types of water. Taste and preference might taste a little bit flat because it doesn't have anything in it other than just straight H2O. But again, if there is a water that I would maybe lean towards going is going to be RO water.
I would love that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I had some. There's actually a water shop. Man, there's actually a water shop really close to here right now that I want to go into, but I know they have that available, and anytime you get a chance, it's very crisp, clean water, but like you said, it can take out some of those minerals and essentials needed for the body. But yeah, I would suggest if there's any time that to try a reverse osmosis water, highly suggested.
For sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
So Doc, with, let's say, mineral water for this example, so obviously we need these minerals within the body for absorption into different cells throughout the body and to utilize the water aspect, the H2O within the system. What have you found with mineral water now?
So mineral water was the water that I found that had the most positive benefits associated with it, which makes sense. We've been talking about mineral regulations this entire podcast. Mineral water is sourced from natural springs, which contain dissolved minerals like calcium, magnesium, potassium bicarbonate, what we've been talking about, which can be helpful for bone health, muscle function, cardiovascular health. Some studies showed that it might improve bone density and reduce risk of osteoporosis, especially if the mineral water was rich in calcium. It may improve digestive health because it can be high in bicarbonate, which bicarbonate is the same compound that's similar to what you have in Tums. It's calcium bicarbonate. So something similar to that. Is that something you should rely on? No, you should definitely look to improve your gut health before you just rely on something like that, but may have some help. It can help with blood pressure regulation if you have a higher magnesium content, which magnesium can play a crucial role in cardiovascular health. So it depends on what kind of mineral is in the water. It can be helpful. Even now, this is the only water that I found to actually possibly improve hydration because of the fluid mineral flow balance in the body. The only other thing was if you are going to consume higher amounts of mineral water, excessive consumptions might lead to imbalances. So just obviously be weary of everything comes with moderation, I guess is maybe the best way to put that. The only thing that I wanted to add is if you go to your doctor and there's something called a comprehensive metabolic panel, it's usually very inexpensive. If you find that it's way more expensive, then go to any website where you can order your own blood kits yourself. I know that there are some that you can get CMPs for 10, 15 bucks. And what you can do then is it allows you to check your mineral and electrolyte levels. So that way you could at least understand, hey, what are maybe the levels that I need to focus on? Should I be drinking something maybe higher in magnesium or sodium or what have you? I don't consume mineral water, but after reading this, I might try to drink some more. But I tend to drink water that has either electrolytes in it that I put. I love Element. It's a great company that has electrolyte packets. I know Amazon even has a good mineral drop. I can't remember the company name, but there are some things you can find online too. So, Doc, I'm curious, what did you find either or even understood about mineral water?
Yeah, so with mineral water, I know back in the day when it first started coming out, this was probably 20 plus years ago, give or take. I know my stance looking in was it was processed, but I didn't like the taste as much. Now that I think I have more knowledge on, especially within the last 10 years or so, I'm definitely way more open and willing to take on maybe a bad taste for positive effects on my body. So if it's something that you feel like doesn't taste the best, I would still encourage you to maybe try different types of waters, especially mineral water that can have a bunch of awesome resources, obviously, for replenishing the body. Now, if you are in athletics, if you are sweating on a consistent basis, maybe even working out, I would suggest more of either mineral water mixing in with either normal water that you're consuming, whether it's from the tap or whether it's from bottled water, just so you can get the electrolytes needed. And I really love the point of the Element.
Yeah.
Again, we're not sponsored by anyone yet, but that is something that will absolutely be beneficial. I love Element, so by all means, check them out.
And the reason why I like Element so much is their amount of electrolytes in their product is way more favorable than maybe like a liquid IV packet, which for those of you out there who enjoy liquid IV, I would encourage you to look at the label compared to an Element label. You'll find Element far outdoes the liquid IV, and liquid IV I think has added sugar to it as well, which I'm against.
Just for taste, but no, it's still Element tastes really good too. So
it does. I do. I enjoy it. So, Doc, I know this is something I'm glad that you put into this to this podcast today, because I was thinking about this last night. I'm like, gosh, we should talk about just how water is stored, especially we shouldn't be drinking it out of plastic bottles. We worry about BPA, all those kinds of things. When we are going to be consuming water every single day, and we can obviously look at the long term of like how would be the best way to not only drink but store our water. There's a lot of things that I think we can look at, especially with making sure that it's appropriately managed, especially if it's going to be in plastic. We know all about plastic and understanding the BPA. How can we set up the ultimate way to consume water and store it appropriately?
Yeah, good point. And this is something more for alkaline water, but this will have an effect with any other water that we consume. Now, with plastics in any of the systems, whether it's you warming up a processed meal and the food is contained within plastic, or you're drinking any type of hydration drink, the body will keep certain part of the plastic and within the body, and then you'll consume it. And then there's going to be certain small particles left largely within the brain and other parts of the body. So with that being said, if you're going to consume any type of liquid, you want it in a glass container. at best. Any stainless steel bottles will also have a better effect compared to plastics, and or BPA-free plastic will also do a little bit better, but any type of storage container, ideally gold standard glass from there. From also best ways to store any type of water, you want to avoid exposure to air. So whether that's fill it completely to the top and have a very tightly sealed cap will have better effects.
Like a Yeti or Hydro Flask where you can really close it off, basically. Yeah.
So when you see like these certain bottled water companies fill the water to the top, there's a reason for that, just so that small little bit of oxygen at the top doesn't have negative effects to that body of water. You want to be able to store it in a cool, dark place, avoided from sunlight for any the bacteria, whether it's small microbiome or small microbacteria, and or chemicals can lead to proliferation of negative properties, if we will. Storage and refrigeration, or in a refrigerator, will also do really good. I thought this was interesting when I was looking up this. The shelf life, more for alkaline water, for the purity, you want to consume and store upwards of 2 weeks. After that, it can start having some negative effects. So when you look at that and how processed manufacturers for water gets processed and then filtered out via distribution, I think there's definitely effects that will come from that. But if you look at buying water, ideally, the cost will be a thing, of course, but if you're able to buy either a glass bottle of a bunch of different waters, I think that'll have a better effect overall. And then you want to avoid contamination, so cleaning the containers on a consistent basis.
For sure.
Probably, if you're going to use the same water bottle, you probably want to clean it at least a few times a week. I'd say upwards a minimum 3 times, if not even more than that, maybe a daily basis. And then look on the labels. There can be an expiration date with water, which a lot of people don't think about. And this is more for plastic. And then look at the source of the water and where you get it from. So whether that's from certain springs, where is it manufactured? Is it in certain states? Is it in your local state? Like, all these things are going to be found on the back of waters. And also for more either mineral water, alkaline water, we'll also have different types of ratios of what properties are actually in the water itself too. But yeah, those are some of the better ways to store alkaline water. So glass, consume it quicker, wash continually, store in a dark, cool place, ideally refrigerated, and yeah.
I always have my Hydro Flask or my Yeti with me. That's usually how I consume water. If I happen to get it in a grocery store, it's just if I'm on the run and I know I need to grab something. But most of the time, I try to put it in my stainless steel container. If I had put it in a plastic bottle and it was in my car for maybe 30 minutes to an hour, especially in Arizona, I usually choose to not consume it ever again, because I just know I'm worried about the leaching of plastics into the water due to the heat. Something to think about. Now they have shown, I think, 2 big studies that came out recently. One, they had took 40 male testicles and did a cadaver study on them, and all 40 had microplastics in them. So that was 100% of the individuals that they had done the research on had microplastics in them. And then there was a study that was done on brains, and they had showed like over 90% had microplastics in them when they were dissecting this. If you have, we're not going to get into microplastics and understanding the implications of health on that, but if you have time, you need to look up what that is doing to our body, and trying to eliminate that from getting into yourself is very difficult, because they're even showing that it can be in the air pollution, those kinds of things too. There's some things we just can't avoid. But making sure that you do your due diligence to try to reduce that as much as possible is going to be helpful, especially for the reproductive systems and the brain.
And going to that point, there's a large amount of cancerous properties from plastics, especially in the brain, that it's a real thing. So that's another factor into processed foods, that yes, it's not the best for you because it's able to store for longer periods of time. Then not only cancerous properties, but also dementia, Alzheimer's are hugely related to that as well.
For sure.
Which, if you want to have quality life for the rest of your life, better to know the facts now and to make small changes, knowing that will be a factor for you and your family.
Absolutely.
There. Doc, I love that you put this in. Myths regarding water.
Yeah,
Let's
and I
dive
think
into
this is a
that.
great way to end the show.
Whew.
I think these are a lot of the things that we have heard, and a lot of these myths we've already eliminated the understanding of today. The first one, you need to drink 8 glasses of water a day. To that reality, we say it's going to vary based on your weight, on your activity level, on climate. There's really no universal requirement. Again, the institute that we had brought up right away in the show showed 3.7 for men, 2.7 liters for women. Galpin's theory obviously showed a different. It really does vary, and I think as long as you are focusing on consuming water every day and making sure that you are cognizant of the dehydration symptoms that we spoke about, you got to just understand it that way versus putting a certain amount needed every single day, Doc. So the next one, drinking water flushes toxins from your body. And so this is one that I think a lot of people think about when they either maybe consumed alcohol the night prior, and then the next day they're like, oh man, I got to drink more water to flush out my system. Or if they're sick and they're like, I got to flush the bugs out of my system. It doesn't really work that way. Our body's liver and our kidneys do a great job of detoxifying without any extra water intake. So it's not that drinking water doesn't help your body. It doesn't have any really effect on that. So just making sure you understand why is always going to be the most important.
I would say with that, if anything, after especially a night of drinking, minerals are going to be more needed.
Probably.
Than water.
For sure.
So.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
The next one, if you're thirsty, you're already dehydrated. Not necessarily. Thirst is a natural signal from the body. It doesn't always mean you are dehydrated, but I would say more often than not, there are individuals out there who are not drinking enough water. But again, doesn't necessarily mean that you are dehydrated. It just means you probably need to drink some water, and it should be done routinely throughout the day.
Absolutely.
Next one, drinking water leads to glowing skin. Hydration definitely is essential for skin health, but it's not a miracle cure for your skin conditions like acne or wrinkles. Coffee and tea dehydrate you, which I believe this one, which now that makes sense. Caffeine is a diuretic, but coffee and tea actually contribute to overall hydration. Not necessarily dehydrates you. It's just, again, the caffeine is just a diuretic, which a diuretic just means it pushes fluids out of you and doesn't necessarily dehydrate you. Just making sure you understand the difference between the two. You can never drink too much water. Not true at all. Overhydration, water intoxication absolutely can occur. Do not assume that cannot get serious health issues from drinking large amounts of water. The next one, you don't need to drink water without sweating. This was interesting. I guess I didn't really know if that was a myth, but your body still loses water through breathing, digestion, and just normal bodily function. You absolutely need to drink water every single day, regardless of if you're sweating. You shouldn't drink water with meals. I've actually found that this does affect me, whether I am drinking water with meals or whether I'm not. This one I'd have to argue a little bit with. Some say that drinking water can aid digestion, contrary to the belief that it dilutes stomach acids, interfere with digestion. Really, I don't drink a lot of water when I eat. I just find that it fills me up more and I'm able to consume more food. Not necessarily as negative effects, but I just prefer not to. But as far as negative effects, I don't think there's anything that we should be concerned about there. But Doc, was there anything that you...
And ideally, if you're going to do that, eat the meal and then drink more water afterwards.
Sure.
I've found that for myself to have more positive effects. And then you get up and move, go for a walk afterwards, which get the whole system going to utilize the resources that you just ingested.
For sure.
But yeah.
Drinking cold water causes weight gain. Did you hear about that one?
I've never heard of that.
Okay. Apparently that was a myth. Again, there's no evidence to suggest that. Do not worry about that. Bottled water is safer than tap water. So...
What type of bottled water?
Yeah. The tap water in many countries is strictly regulated and often just as safe, if not safer than bottled water. That's a tough one. If I were to choose tap versus bottle, I'd have to, I don't know, I'd maybe choose bottle just because there's
Depends on the
probably
country.
less harsh water, hard water in certain states. But again, it might depend, like you said, on where you're at in the country. But yeah, I don't think you should really be too worried about that. If you are going to consume tap water, just make sure it's filtered. Bottled water, I drink it. I'm not too worried about it. I just try to have filtered water in a stainless steel container. Next one, you should always drink water even if you're not thirsty. It's important to stay hydrated. Forcing water when not thirsty can be unnecessary and may lead to overhydration. I don't know. I'd argue that. I'd say we should still be focused on consuming water regularly every day. Doc?
100%. If you wait till you're thirsty, there's probably signs that you're either depleted in other areas throughout the body. And just to even get on a proper habit cycle, whether you're thirsty or not, even if it's a couple sips at a time, I think you'll have a better absorption rate to utilize that water throughout all the other cells of the body. Yeah, I would suggest definitely, if you're not thirsty, still consume.
For sure. Yeah, so I'm going to cross that one out for sure. You need to drink sports drinks for proper hydration after exercise. This one, I'm interested why they said this. So they said that water is sufficient for hydration after exercise. Sports drinks are only necessary for high intensity or prolonged workouts where electrolyte loss is significant. I would argue that. I really think so it doesn't have to be sports drinks, usually too high sugar anyway. Definitely electrolyte pack or more mineral water would probably be what we would recommend anyway.
Yes.
But if you happen to have only a sports drinks available, I still think that's important if it does have necessary amounts of electrolytes in it.
Yeah, your body can get depleted of these electrolytes without sporting events, without exercise. Maybe there's with certain conditions it can deplete different properties that are needed. I would highly suggest it, especially if you're having headaches on a consistent basis, oftentimes, especially tension headaches, usually feeling at the base of the skull. That can be for some people a sign of dehydration, but also needing the electrolytes that. So
I actually find that it helps me when I consume electrolytes in the morning. I don't have as many headaches or as much change in fogginess or clarity. It really does help me. That's what I found when consuming that in the morning.
But with that too, for some people, that if you don't have many other resources, if you're on the road, on a sporting event, then yes, sports drinks, obviously watching the sugar amount will have good effects, but
Food for thought.
Yep.
Absolutely. Clear urine means you're well hydrated. Now, this is interesting.
I almost brought this up.
Yeah. So clear urine, just what it means is you have maybe overhydrated in a way. And the way that we would indicate proper hydration is actually pale yellow in color urine. That's what you're actually trying to shoot for. To say that it's a marker of, hey, I've definitely drank enough water today, I'm doing good when I have clear urine. Not necessarily. It just means, again, as far as a balance, you maybe have consumed too much and you're still needing a proper electrolyte balance or a certain balance. Doc, anything to say to that?
So with urine, it's actually filtered blood that is excreted from your body. So knowing that, you have to compare, okay, so are there certain other vitamins, are there certain things that you're consuming with the water output? Because if you're consuming a lot of water, but you have these other things, the urine that comes out might not be clear. It might, even if you're hydrating well, it might be filtering out these other chemicals that you consume. It depends on pre and post. How have you compared your urine from previous other times with the same things that you're consuming as well? So
even a good point would be if you, let's say you consumed a great amount of water one day, but then at the end of the day, you got an IV of B vitamins. Your urine's going to be bright yellow. It had
100%.
nothing to do with the fact you didn't consume a lot of water that day. It was just the regulation of your urine at that time had high amounts of substrates being urinated out because your body just couldn't utilize all those vitamins in the IV pack. So I guess what should be said is clear urine isn't an indicator of hydration.
Love it.
That's maybe more what you should understand. And then lastly, drinking water before bed guarantees better sleep. Not necessarily. Drinking too much water could cause sleep disruptions, making you wake up to urinate during the night. We talked about why that would be, especially if you're not well balanced mineral wise. Doc, anything to say on that?
No, that's perfect. Consuming water throughout the day in small bouts has better effects on the circadian cycle. It takes a little bit of time for the body to re-regulate itself, but
that was Great. I think there was a lot of things in here that people just have always thought about and maybe believed versus what actually either the research shows or because I even learned a few things going through the body of research here. For those of you that enjoyed this podcast, stuck with us to the end, thank you so much. We hope that you guys got some value from this. Please share with those that you feel is necessary. Thank you so much for continuing to support us. We always appreciate your guys' input. Please comment anything that you guys have questions on. We'd love to share more if needed, and subscribe. All of those good things, guys. Thank you so much. With that, we'll see you next time.
Absolutely.
Disclaimer, the content provided in this health podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast is solely at your own risk. The creators and hosts of this podcast are not responsible for any actions or decisions you may take based on the information presented.
Thanks for joining us on The Functional Code. For more evidence-based health insights, subscribe, rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. Remember, your journey to a healthier you begins with understanding the Functional Code. Until next time, stay well, stay informed, and embrace the science of living well.